Good evening. I'm making this video in response to a great question that was asked in the chat earlier today. This is take two because I forgot to turn on the audio the first time. So that's fantastic. Anyway, the question, we can read it here, is how can a person set healthy boundaries with people, especially if we plan to work in medicine? So the first thing to think about when we're discussing boundaries is what the actual point of boundaries is. When I started teaching, I had come off of being very, very lucky. I had a lot of teachers who had extremely generous boundaries with me, and they taught me a great deal. And so when I started teaching, I thought I should be as available as possible. And many people in the chat can perhaps remember in those days where I was taking calls at 11 p.m. If you woke me up at 1 a.m., I would take the call, no matter what. And my wife was consistently telling me about boundaries. She says, it's not healthy for you, it's not healthy for them, it's not sustainable. And that's really the thing to understand about boundaries is the first thing. Boundaries are for you. Boundaries are for you. They're not a social moray. It's not just something that we do. They're something that makes you better at what you do and makes you feel better in the long term. This is something that you'll discuss in psychiatry if you ever study psychiatry as something called therapeutic frame. So when a new patient comes to a psychiatry office, they will establish the frame of therapy, which means when are we going to meet? What are we going to talk about? What type of things should we not talk about if that's something that's important to that particular frame of therapy? When is it, how can you contact me, i.e. via email, via my clinic number, via whatever. And these things actually are very important. They establish structure for the patient, and it's something that we know gives, that structure helps facilitate the therapeutic process. So when you talk about boundaries for yourself, you can think of it in that way. It's sort of setting the frame, but for your entire life. So how do we start to set boundaries with people? We have to start with setting boundaries with ourselves. I'll give you an example, a very concrete example. A very significant volume of my clients are college students who maybe they're just getting into their pre-health track or the upper level phase of their education, or maybe they're just coming into college from high school, and they notice that they feel kind of off. There are things missing in their life. Maybe it's the first time that they've lived away from home. Classes are rigorous, and they start doing things that are really unhealthy. Students who had very clean diets start drinking Monster and coffee. They become addicted to coffee. They stop exercising. They either lose a bunch of weight or they gain a bunch of weight. They sometimes they become anxious when before they were really calm. These types of things come from a failure to respect your own boundaries. And like you might imagine, when you have any of those problems going on, you're not as productive. If you're teaching or coaching or taking care of patients, you're not as kind with the people you're trying to help. And you don't feel good either. So setting boundaries with yourself isn't just for you, it's for everyone you want to help too. Which brings us to the next key point is you should never feel guilty or as if you're giving yourself too much lenience by setting boundaries. Boundaries are a fundamental right that you have, and they're something that you need if you're going to be able to perform and serve and lead at 100% of what you're capable of. So once you've learned to set boundaries with yourself, i.e. I will stop studying at X time so I can sleep, so that I can have some time with for my religious practice, for my musical instrument practice, for my artistic outlets, whatever it is. I am going to not study so much that I don't cook for myself. I'm going to, so on and so forth. Once you've done that, you can start setting boundaries with the people closest to you. It's critical that you figure out yourself first, because once you set boundaries with yourself, you no longer feel as guilty asking other people to respect your boundaries. So if you yourself aren't giving yourself space and you ask someone else for space, then you feel bad because you might think, well, they needed me, they were depending on me, and I asked them for space. It becomes a bit easier when you can do it with yourself. When you start with the people around you, it can be very hard, especially for people at those transition points, right? College to professional, high school to college. Excuse me. And a lot of the time, it boundary setting with the people closest to you is your growth into the adult relationship. So when you were a kid and mom said, "Come to the kitchen to help me cook," you said, "Yes, ma'am." And when dad said, "Hey, come check this out," you said, "Yes, sir," ideally, or at least you ran over, right? You had expectations in the house. There comes a time where you have to start titrating that and saying, "I love you, I respect you, I really want to hear what you're saying, and I very much value your input, but I have to do this for me." And you can even frame it in a way that is ultra respectful to them. You can say, "You took care of me through childhood, mom. You invested in my education, and now, in order for me to honor that investment and get the most out of it, I need the space to take care of these needs." So that's a whole. I've had people where we go through multiple sessions of consultation to figure out how to have those conversations. So that can be hard. If you need some support through that or you want to talk through it, just let me know. Put questions in the chat. Anyway, once you figured it out with yourself and the people closest to you, those are the hardest places. The next place to take it is into your professional space. That means setting boundaries first off with the institutions you're a part of, your company, your team if you're on a project or a small startup, your practice if you're a physician, your medical school faculty if you're a student. I'll give you one specific example that really matters. And these things matter, by the way. I feel that poor boundary setting is a significant contributor to the findings of recent studies, like one that came out a few weeks ago, where 30% of fourth year medical students are clinically depressed, 10% report suicidal ideation. And there are many more statistics that I could shock you with about that. Specific example, like I said, I work with a lot of students who are doing research. And when you do research, what is a professional environment, what is okay, tends to vary from lab to lab. Students make a huge mistake very frequently, which is when they're asked, "Can you come in at midnight? Can you do 3 projects instead of 2? Do you want to do this extra thing? Do you want to be on this extra paper?" They say yes, 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 because they stop thinking about what they need and they start thinking about nothing except the application. First to med school, then to residency, then to fellowship. Folks, it never stops. If you don't respect your own boundaries, you will never respect your own boundaries. It's not going to stop when you get into med school and so on and so forth. It just has to be a decision you make. So, one thing that helps people in that kind of scenario is taking stock of what you need. For example, I need about an hour a day for physical activity. I need about an hour a day to have dinner with my wife. I need a certain amount of time per day to read, to engage in intellectually curious pursuits, whether that aligns with my academic interests or not. So if I'm going into a project with a new lab supervisor or a new clinical rotation or a class, if I'm expected to do things, I'm going to let people know these are the boundaries that I'm not going to break. I'm going to give myself this much time. And if I say no to a project, it's because I know that I can't do it to my standard of work ethic without compromising those things. People tend to be very positive in responding to that. They like that you know yourself and that you're straightforward, as opposed to taking on way more than you can handle and then doing a terrible job because you've exceeded your bandwidth. So you should feel empowered to do that. Okay, so we've got self, we've got family, we've got institution, classmates, colleagues, supervisors, teachers, all of these things. And finally, how do we set boundaries with patients? Which I think was sort of the long-term view of the question that was asked. And like we said at the beginning of the video, therapeutic frame is very important. How you're going to conduct yourself with the patient, being explicit about that, having a professional mode of communication, that's a big deal. Not only for frame of therapy, but also for your own ongoing mental health. So if you are a oncologist and you're dealing with patients all day who are dying of cancer, you're going to have to be very empathetic. You have to listen not just to their medical concerns and give them medical information. You have to understand where they're coming from emotionally. You have to engage with their the comprehensive portfolio of their life circumstances. And doing that again and again is very rigorous. So if you're the type of person who says, well, here's my cell phone number, email me any time of day, it seems great. And when you're in our position where you don't have that tremendous volume of patients, it's fine. But imagine if you have 300 patients on your management roster, and any one of them can call you. And one of them calls you at 9 p.m. when you're just settling down for a cup of tea or warm milk or something before bed, and you pick up the phone and you're able to squeeze out a bit more compassion. You hang up and you feel good about yourself, and then another one calls, and well, you want to be just with both of them, so you take the next call, and you just do a terrible job because you ran out of juice. Doesn't that seem like a worse scenario than turning it off at a certain time, taking care of your needs, and then being able to do a fantastic job when you're back the next day? So that's sustainability. So these are some ideas about why boundaries matter and how you can begin to implement them in your life, always starting with yourself. Just as a concluding remark, based on the uh, years of interactions I've had with people who have trouble with boundary setting, and myself included, never feel guilty about setting boundaries. You're not letting anyone down. You're not letting yourself down. You're not going to do a better job of the things that matter to you by ignoring your boundaries. Recognize that boundary setting is your right, and it's something that's going to help get you further than you think you could ever go because it makes you sustainable. But I could ramble about that for ages. Please put any questions in the chat, any comments, any discussions. Thank you so much for such a sincere and thought-provoking question. Have a beautiful evening.